Hi, guys, and welcome back for the seventh episode of the Buy Yourself Flowers podcast. I'm Isaure, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Kim Sylwander, a postdoctoral researcher at LSE in the Department of Media and Communications. Today, we will be discussing what affective atmospheres can reveal about online youth culture and how young people deal with online aggression. Okay, so let's get started. What were the steps in your career that led you into this field of research, and what inspired you to focus on effective atmospheres specifically within online youth cultures?
Well, I started, so I have an undergrad degree in international law and a postgraduate degree in human rights law, and had worked with children's experiences of violence in different settings and their rights to freedom of violence. And that had brought me, so my work in the UN had brought me to asking questions about communication technologies and we were reading in the media and reading research about the increases of violence online and children's kind of everyday experiences being more and more inundated with um, kind of a normalization of violence in their online spaces. And so for my PhD research, I decided to focus on this issue and wanted to understand. First, I was interested in trying to understand cyberbullying, but of course, that's a kind of an academic term, which doesn't always fit into what young people are experiencing. So what I did was I followed about 150 young people aged about 11 to 15 on a social media platform at the time in Sweden. So it was a Swedish social media platform that was very popular at the time. And I wanted to see, okay, what kinds of interactions do they think are problematic or hurtful or makes them angry, makes them, kind of hit back or try to protect their friends or whatever it might be. And with that, I started to realize that they weren't framing these interactions as cyberbullying, they were talking about it as online hate, kind of a broad term that would stretch from both things that were very playful and teasy kind of thing between friends to very serious instances of what might even be deemed as hate crimes. And I was interested in the concept of affective atmospheres because what it does is that it doesn't just say, so if you imagine, for example, when you walk into a school, and if you look at the bullying research that has been in schools, they sometimes talk about atmosphere. And in schools where there is a lot of violence, where there's a lot of bullying, researchers will tell you, as will the children who go to those schools, that you can feel it as soon as you step into the school. There's a sense of kind of what's going on between people here. People are not don't feel well. They're conscious of each other in ways that prepares them for potential violence and the bullying that may be going on in those spaces. And that was the sense I was getting in this online space. So it was a space where the young people I was following online, they went to the same schools, they lived in kind of close by neighborhoods to each other in a medium-sized town in Sweden, and it was very clear that this was a space where they spent a lot of time. So they talked about everything from what they were doing in school to what their grades were to who they were hanging out with and so on. So it was really everything. A very kind of everyday kind of conversations going on. And what I sensed was because of the language they were using and because of the way they were interacting, they had a sense of an atmosphere on the space. So there was certain language which was used that they reacted to very strongly. So words like whore were used a lot, especially against girls, and girls really didn't like it. They felt very bad being called whore,
Of
and they
course.
very often said, yeah, and they often said that it's the worst thing you can be called as a girl. But online, people just throw it around, whereas you would never say it in school. So that also gave me kind of those kinds of um, discussions gave me a sense that okay, so actually the atmosphere in this online space is also different from the offline, and that also then tracks kind of with previous research, which shows that in the online space, um, negative behaviors can be exacerbated. So it's not that we're inventing kind of new ways of being mean to people, but there are the online space may kind of help make it worse, basically, because people can be anonymous, people can send something to you as a DM so that others don't see it, for example. And there are a lot of different features and functionalities of the sites themselves that can make it easier to say mean things,
Yeah.
do mean things. And then, of course, there's a whole psychology behind it of being not face to face with someone, not facing the same kind of social consequences. And all of these different aspects or elements brought together this sense that actually it creates a certain type of social atmosphere, a feeling that when you enter a space, certain things are expected, certain things may happen to you, and which also then creates a sense that you need to prepare for that. So, for example, amongst the girls, where I saw a lot of sexualized hate, both between girls, but also kind of directed at girls. So that was the focus of my study, really. I could see that as soon as someone was called a bad name, for example, others would jump in, and especially if it was girls that had experienced this, so other girls would kind of get into the discussion and say, "Hey, you're not allowed to say this. This is a wonderful person," and try to love bomb that person, so that also kind of in the comment sections, the negative things would be less visible. So you had this kind of push and pull where I could see very obviously there were kind of mean things happening and an exacerbation of bullying behavior, which is often sexualized, especially against girls. Um, but at the same time, you had kind of also a sense of we have to help each other, we have to support each other. And there was, yes, so this movement back and forth, and things could happen very quickly and kind of blossom up or become very infected very quickly, but then at the same time also die off quickly as well because things were intense and then they kind of lost their interest because people stopped talking about it basically. So my interest in affective atmosphere came from trying to understand both how the technology facilitates certain types of behaviors, but then also how kind of youth culture, but also local cultures of, for example, bullying and the normative behaviors around that. So ideas about how girls should be, ideas about how boys should be, but also, for example, um, racialized ideas about, you know, things like how immigrants talk or Muslim girls who wear hijabs and what people think about that. So there was a lot of racism as well that was kind of being spread. So I looked at the atmosphere from both a cultural perspective, so looking at what was happening between the people and how young people were also reproducing kind of norms that you can see in society, but how the features and the technology was also exacerbating negative behavior, at the same time also facilitating um, a form of resistance. So people were also resisting these norms. They also used the space to say, look, this is not what you should be saying to people, and trying to model other types of behavior. So yeah, I was really interested in kind of how the social meets the technology and how they work together.
You already touched on this in your great answer, but what role do you think that platform affordances, so for example, the algorithms, the comment
Mm,
sections, and the anonymity play in shaping these like online hate and online aggression cultures?
mm. That's a very good question. And I would say, so having now researched this over a decade, I could see also big changes. So what we had maybe 20 years ago were a lot of different forms of social media platforms. They weren't as readily accessible because people didn't have, phones that they could access social media platforms on. It was usually from a home computer or so on. And there were kind of local iterations of social media platforms, and oftentimes, or after a while, people would move across to other platforms. So what we've seen in what we call kind of social media 2.0 was that we saw a shift from lots and lots of different social media platforms to concentrated the kind of everybody moving towards these bigger platforms. So like today we have Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, which are for example, in the European setting where I am, those are usually the biggest platforms that young people use, both to communicate, but also to watch content, etc. So we saw this shift from a multitude of different types of technologies to now uh,
Concentrated. Yeah.
yeah, concentrated in big platforms that are owned, of course, by big multinational, huge companies. And what we saw then was that the types of spaces and the kind of functionalities that they offered became also slimmer. So and because the concentration of young people on these sites became so apparent, and now it's like it's just it completely dominates statistically. Of course, young people are kind of, in a way, socially forced to live through these platforms, functions, and features, and it makes up a big part of how young people, but of course as well adults, live their online lives, right? And a big shift there is for example, so you mentioned algorithms. So the algorithms are quite different as they now push content to us, and as well that we can scroll. There's an endless scrolling pattern, which is then combined with kind of this very fast and short content, algorithmic, or the algorithms that present us what they want us to see. And with that, I think what's happened, which was maybe a little bit different from when I started looking at these issues, is that you have a vast amount of content. And in that content, the algorithms are pushing certain norms. So they're not neutral, right? Algorithms are not neutral in the sense that they don't show you everything there is to see, and they show you what they think you want to see based on your age, your gender, where you are, and other information they have about you and how they understand you and how you interact. So they may, and as you probably know, they may push negative content as well. So they may push um, extreme political views your way, or they may push kind of harmful content such as self-harm content, or um, things that may support eating disorders and so on. So what we're seeing is there's very normative content being pushed to young people, and there. As a young person, we know from kind of brain development studies and so on that young people do compare themselves a lot. So being young is a period in life where you compare yourself a lot to other people, and that has a big impact on how you feel about those things. So I think kind of the algorithmic formats that these platforms have, they both push certain normative ideas about how bodies, how people should be, what sexuality you should be, what you should believe in. And usually those are not very dynamic. Usually there's quite a kind of a slim idea about that you are receiving about how people should be, what they should believe in, and also how we should relate to one another. So what we see, for example, in the last 10 years, of course, is an increase of things like young boys being pushed to extremist political views
Yes.
that are harmful, and then that exacerbates, for example, hate against girls and women
Yeah.
in online spaces. Um, and also, for example, when it comes to young girls, they very often experience, very normative ideals around how women's bodies should be,
Yeah.
things like body weight, or how you should look, what you should be buying. So it's also highly, highly commercialized, of course. And that also creates ideals that are then circulated within friend groups. So it doesn't just impact the big masses, but it also integrates into kind of youth culture, what we buy, what we wear, and how young people relate to one another. So these spaces create kind of they allow us to be agents in the sense that they allow us to make choices, they allow us to block things or choose things or scroll where we want to or search for things, but they also push us or nudge us very clearly towards certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is creating the basis of what we're seeing. So if you imagine going into a school or a shopping center, for example. So if you think about an online space as a form of architecture, when you walk into a space, it tells you, it nudges you always. So
Yeah.
it nudges you by the way it has designed the corridor. Then you walk down the corridor. A
Yeah.
classroom is designed in a certain way. You sit, you have a certain spot where you sit, and you look in a certain direction. It tells you something about the power structure in that room. The teacher is the one with the power, and the students are not the ones with the
Yeah.
power. And although online spaces are not necessarily as overt in how they communicate these types of architecture, the nudging, the way we should, it communicates, it is always communicating to us what we should believe, how we should think, who we should be looking at, who we should be sending things to. So these are structures that are built in and become seemingly neutral to us, but they're not. So they are actually shaping our interactions, and how we feel about those spaces.
Would you therefore attribute the rise in mental health problems like eating disorders, self-harm to those algorithms and those platform affordances? Would you say that's one of the main reasons why there has been a rise in those mental health issues in the past decade?
So this is a tricky question, and we're a lot of researchers who are working on this issue. And there are some researchers that would definitely tell you, yes, that's 100% the way it is. I would say that this is a combination of the rise of the issues of mental health among youth is a combination of offline and online
Yeah.
uh, kind of factors. So what we see, for example, when we ask youth in America or in Europe about why their mental health is failing, or why they feel bad, or why they feel stressed, then usually at the top, academic
Yeah.
kind
Pressure.
of academic pressures are the worst, right?
Yeah.
They are what is causing stress. And then, so if you have a situation where young people are under immense pressure, uh, as from kind of academic pressure, as well as other things are happening. So, for example, you have less spaces for young people to hang out
Yeah.
in the offline world. We
Yeah.
have a sense today that the world is more dangerous, which is keeping young people also inside. So
Yeah.
another kind of a changed sense of safety. And then there are other issues as well. So we've gone through a pandemic, we've gone through, and before that we went through, a horrendous financial crash as well, and then added another financial crash on top of that. So you have adults who are not doing well,
Yeah.
and then raising children who are then under immense both economic
Pressure.
but also academic pressure. So you have these, and those are just a few of the factors, but you have those factors interacting with then spending a lot of time online, and yes, meeting these algorithms that are um, that keep you engaged, that they're built to keep you engaged and
Yeah.
keep you online. And yes, they are also engaged to, or they're also built to like capture whether you're not feeling well. And even though companies say that they're not pushing, things like eating disorders or things to young people, when we look at the data coming from young people, yes, they actually are,
Yeah.
and very quickly. So there's a lot of studies done with things like sock puppet accounts, where you create a fake account and you add a few details to see how quickly will you be able to access, or will the algorithms push negative things
Right.
like extremist political views or eating disorder content, for example. And that happens within 24 hours. So
Oh,
it's these platforms are designed to keep you engaged, and the way they keep you engaged is by pushing things they think that you
negative
want to see.
content. Yeah.
Yeah, not always, of course, but for many people, and what we see is unfortunately kids who are already not doing well. So kids who are already experiencing violence or bullying or feeling depressed, the online space can exacerbate that.
Yeah.
So it makes them feel worse, and they likely, if you're experiencing bullying in school, for example, you'll likely experience cyberbullying as well,
Yeah.
because of course the offline and online world are completely integrated today. So this is a very sad fact in life, that people who are already not doing well offline will likely not do well online as well.
Yeah.
So we see those correlations. With that being said, there is still a big discussion amongst researchers, kind of what is the causality? So what is causing young people's mental health to decline so rapidly, and why is it that we're not doing well? I think the consensus at the moment is that it's a host of factors where social media, for example, is one important factor, but it isn't the sole
The
cause.
sole
Yeah.
factor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer. From your research, how do you find that young people navigate online aggression?
So young people navigate in many different ways. There's a very simple way of navigating, which we've seen in the data, is kind of deciding to either completely go offline, so leave. And
Yeah.
in my data, I've seen kids leave platforms saying that I close down my account. I'm not going to be here anymore because it's just too overwhelming. So, and
Yeah.
usually that's people who are victims of bullying and abuse, um, whereas others may try to counteract what they're experiencing. So they may hit back, which sometimes leads to circles of kind of violence and abuse. So I've seen people, for example, be called names, and then what happens is that person turns around and calls the other people names, and then there's kind of
A
a
loop, a
negative
cycle.
cycle,
Yeah.
right? And that can lead to quite extreme things. So in my data, I've seen, for example, things that have started either online that have passed then to the offline world. So that have resulted in fights in school. And I'm sure most young people will have a story like that to tell, that someone said something online and then that led to, a fight or a dispute in school, or the other way around. Something happened in school that then went online. So um, those are things that are happening, or kind of cycles that I've seen. But as I said, also, I have seen a lot of people who so one positive thing about the online world is that the same psychological factors that make it easy to say negative things make it also easy to say things that you
Positive
might not
things.
dare to. So you have bystanders, for example. Bystanders are the people who are not involved necessarily, for example, in an altercation, but who have witnessed it. So you may have bystanders in the offline space where a bystander may be afraid that they will become the target of the bully. And of course that sense still exists online, but what I've seen is things like anonymity and things like that can also protect you, in the sense that it can allow you to then go and say, hey, look, I don't think that it's right, I don't think you should be saying these things, etc. So kind of getting involved in a positive way is also something I've seen. And young people you know collectively deciding to support people that they see have experienced negative things is definitely something I've seen. And then, of course, a lot of young people are creating spaces where they feel safe. So, um, one of the best things about the internet is that we see that minority youth are able to connect with people who either have the same opinions, believe in the same things, or maybe have the same experiences. So, young people experiencing racism in the Swedish context where I'm from, for example, they create what they feel are safe spaces on Instagram, for example, where they know the people who are active there have similar experiences, and they feel safe with one another. They know that they're not going to experience hate, they're not going to experience racism, and so on. So creating their own safe spaces, but also, of course, getting politically engaged. So young people who have witnessed things they don't agree with online, um, can join youth groups and become active. So mobilization and finding other like-minded youth is definitely also something we've seen. And using the online space also, of course, to mobilize against things that you're seeing in your communities. This is also something that is very important, and we're seeing around the world young people mobilizing for example, to save the environment, or against racism and other causes as well. Oh, and for example, freedom of speech in many countries, and Amnesty is working with for example, um, young people on these issues as well. So I think people are handling it in many different ways, and different solutions will work differently for kind of different kids, which is a very simple thing to say, perhaps. But Whereas one kid might be helped by completely going offline and closing down every social media account they have. That might not be the solution for others. So somebody else might then stay on, let's say, something like Snapchat, which is one of the social media where
Eating.
we see, yeah, where a lot of stuff is happening, right? And a lot of people experience everything from unsolicited sexual imagery um, to yeah, bullying and so on. So what we see on Snapchat is that some kids are, for example, just creating, very private accounts. So they're still on Snapchat, still talking to the people they want to talk to, but they're just very small circles. They don't see what everybody else is doing. They're not connecting with everybody in their school. But of course, and I'm sure many young people will have experienced this, that it's not always so easy because blocking people sends a signal to people that might be difficult. So, for example, one of my studies, which has been on sexual consent in intimate communication among young people on Snapchat, there a lot of the girls were saying if, for example, a boy approaches them or asks for their, asks to connect on Snapchat and wants to communicate with them in ways they're not interested in, they've told me that it's difficult to block them, which is of course something you could do to not have to communicate with people you don't want to. But it's hard to block them because they may face consequences in their
Yeah,
school life, right?
yeah, definitely.
Um, yeah, so they may then, and some of them have told me that, that boys have bullied them because they blocked them,
Yeah,
following, a boy maybe sending an unsolicited picture or a question that they didn't like, and then the girl blocks them, and then the boy then starts to tell everyone that, you know, it's spreading rumors basically about the girl. So kind of this fear of what might happen offline and online seems to be also determining how they react. And young people, in my experience, are very aware. They understand the functionalities and have very developed ways of communicating that are very subtle. So, and some, I will admit, in my research, some young people have a very hard time with the subtleties of how you communicate in, for example, on Snapchat in ways that. So one of those examples would be like, what do you do when when somebody sends you something you don't like? Then kind of how to communicate back to that person in a way that isn't too aggressive, but still at the same time clear, but still communicating like, look, I don't want to have this picture, I don't want to do this, but I don't dislike you, I still want to be friends. Those kinds of very difficult
subtleties. Yeah,
yeah, subtleties and ways of maneuvering social relationships is something, in at least in my research, that is
yeah,
coming up. Young people are doing all the time.
yeah,
Um, and I think so when it comes to, for example, if we zoom out and I look at the a lot of the education that is being designed for young people and messaging around social media and around communication online, it very often misses these like how in tune young people really are and how well they navigate these spaces and how refined communication really is. And I think adults don't know and totally miss kind of how it works for young
yeah,
people in real life.
yeah,
And there tends to be kind of an overly negative, almost an abstinence like approach in a lot of the messaging, and it looks different in different settings and so on. But yeah, so I'm amazed by how young people really have so many ways of navigating their online space in ways that and to be honest, sometimes they succeed in protecting themselves or navigating these very difficult subtleties, whereas in other cases they absolutely
quite
fail.
difficult. Yeah,
Yeah, and the consequences can be massive and
yeah,
really hurtful and
definitely.
put them in dangerous situations. So,
Yeah,
uh, but usually I do think that young people are very capable, knowledgeable, and use what they have at their disposal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Looking ahead, what do you see as the most important directions for future research on online youth cultures and affective atmospheres?
Thank you for that question. It is not completely simple. One thing I do think is that we do need to keep on studying because I mean, as years pass, new kind of cultures and new groups will come into these spaces. So we do need to just continue studying the same
Yeah,
phenomenon. And of course, there's different types of studies. So we have the big studies just looking at what do young people do, what are they looking at, what are they experiencing, and having that data like over many years is very important. And understanding how different platforms work to exacerbate or to support. So how they exacerbate negative behavior or how they support positive behavior. These are super, super important things, right? And because platforms are constantly changing and regulation is constantly changing, legislation is changing, which means that there are also changes that are made to platforms all the time. And it is, as a researcher, hard to keep up. And it's important to keep on being excited about finding, finding out what is happening right now. What are kids doing right now? And not be comfortable with, oh, we knew what they were doing 10 years ago. No, because the reality today looks very different. We now also have AI. So the impact of how AI will reshape these relationships. So the interaction and why atmosphere again is important is because it's not just the relation between a human and a human. It's the relationship between a human and technologies or and the and other material objects, for example. And when you have AI that's coming in, which is also kind of a humanoid technology, um, we're going to see really, really big things happening, and we already are, of course. And so back to your question on mental health, how will the interaction of young people and AI help or maybe make it worse? This we actually don't know yet, and how that interplays also into the interactions that young people have with each other, we also don't know yet. So I think AI definitely is kind of and the impact of AI and the atmospheres that are created around that, I think are very important
yeah,
to look at. But I'm also, and that's kind of been the shift from my original research to the research I've been doing in the last few years, which has been also about looking at intimate relationships. So not just what you could see, for example, in a public space
yeah,
or on a, in a comment section or whatever, but actually how the individual's relationships with one another, how is it shaping how we think about relationships, how we think about things like trust, like safety, uh, like intimacy, like friendship, all those kinds of feelings, and how they're shaped by these technologies,
yeah.
and how we interact within these technologies. Um, or mediated through them? I think these are questions that I will be looking at, and I know others as well will be. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. You gave such great answers. I learned so much. And thank you for discussing your research. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Have a lovely
Bye.
day. Bye.